"Colonel, glad to see you." The words detonated in the room, hanging there like a live grenade everyone suddenly realized had no pin. To fully understand the expression on my grandmother's face in that instant, the way her champagne glass froze midway to her mouth, the way her lips rounded into a perfect circle of disbelief, you have to understand the 22 years that came before it. 22 years of her believing ID amounted to nothing. 22 years of me allowing that belief to stand. My name is Sonia. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I command a brigade of 3,000 soldiers. I've served combat tour in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I've been awarded the Bronze Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Defense Superior Service Medal. I brief members of Congress. I make decisions with national security implications. My grandmother believes I stock shelves at a dollar store, and I've never once corrected her. Like most family misconceptions, it began with a sliver of truth buried beneath layers of assumption. When I was 26, freshly graduated from West Point and newly commissioned as a second lieutenant, I came home for Christmas. My grandmother asked what I did in the Army. "I mostly work nights," I said, accurate enough. At the time, I was stationed at Fort Hood, overseeing overnight training exercises and managing logistics operations that couldn't be conducted during daylight hours. Nights, her face folded with concern. "Oh, sweetheart, that's rough for a young woman. What kind of work is it?" "Inventory management, personnel coordination, facility oversight, all perfectly correct descriptions of a logistics officer's responsibilities." She patted my hand. "Well, everyone has to start somewhere." I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her about my commission, my training, the trajectory I was on. But then my cousin Bria walked in, home from her first year of medical school, and the spotlight shifted instantly. Everyone turned to her, praising her dedication, asking about her classes, marveling at her ambition. I sat quietly in my issued Army sweater, feeling something unexpected stir in my chest. Not resentment, something closer to amusement. They saw exactly what they expected to see: a young woman working nights handling inventory. They filled in the rest themselves, constructing a story that fit neatly into their understanding of the world. And sitting there eating Christmas cookies while they celebrated Bria's future, I realized there was power in being underestimated, so I leaned into it. Over the years, I refined the approach. When family asked about work, I stayed vague but truthful, still on nights, still dealing with inventory, personnel stuff, you know how it goes. I'd sigh, shrug, let the silence do the rest. And they happily obliged. My grandmother became convinced I worked retail. Probably one of those big stores, she'd tell her bridge club friends. They need people overnight to restock. It's hard work, but Sonia's always been willing to do whatever's necessary. My aunts assumed I was a security guard. "She works nights at some warehouse," Aunt Helen would say, shaking her head. "Those hours aren't normal. No wonder she never settled down." Uncle Jerry was certain I was a janitor. "Nothing wrong with honest labor," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder with hearty condescension. "Someone else got to keep those places clean." The reality. I worked nights because I was directing night operations. I handled inventory because I was responsible for millions of dollars worth of military equipment. I dealt with personnel issues because thousands of soldiers' lives and well-being fell under my command, but I never corrected them. Watching my family build this elaborate fiction around my life became a kind of private entertainment. Their misunderstanding wasn't cruel, that was the beauty of it. They genuinely believed they were being supportive. Every worried glance, every sympathetic comment, every unsolicited piece of advice, they thought they were helping. They thought I needed saving from my own bad decisions. My grandmother was the most persistent. "Sonia, dear," she'd say, pulling me aside at gatherings. "Have you ever thought about going back to school, getting a degree? It's never too late. I already had a bachelor's degree from West Point and a master's in strategic studies from the Army War College." "I'll think about it, Grandma. You're too smart for this night work. A girl like you shouldn't waste her life stocking shelves." At the time, I was commanding a forward operating base in Afghanistan, coordinating air and ground assets in one of the most complex operational environments of modern warfare. "You're probably right. I worry about you," she'd continue. "All alone, no husband, no real career. What kind of life is that?" I owned a home in Virginia. My retirement portfolio outperformed most civilian benchmarks. I had the trust and respect of senior military leadership. It's not so bad, I'd say. She'd pat my cheek. You're so brave, making the best of things. I'd smile and reach for another cookie. There were boundaries, though, rules to the game. When she tried to slip me cash to help with bills, I gently refused. When my uncle offered to connect me with a real job at an insurance firm, I thanked him and said I wasn't ready for a change. When my aunt suggested I move back home to save money, I assured her I was comfortable where I was. I let them pity me, but only so much. Let them help, but never in ways that would expose the truth. It was a careful balancing act, and I got better at it every year. Bria became a doctor, applause all around. Tyler became a lawyer, celebration. Leanne got engaged to a dental surgeon. More congratulations. And I continued working nights, stocking shelves, maybe doing security, always struggling, according to family legend. Poor Sonia became a refrain. Work so hard never gets ahead. Meanwhile, I was promoted to captain, then major, then lieutenant colonel, then colonel. Each step brought greater authority, deeper clearance, larger commands. I briefed generals, I planned operations, I shaped strategy. Such a hard worker, my aunts would sigh, but no direction. I deployed to combat zones, I earned medals, I brought soldiers home alive. Still on that night shift, my grandmother would tell people, I keep telling her to find something better. The irony was exquisite. The closest I ever came to breaking character was 3 years ago, after a brutal deployment in Syria. I'd lost 2 soldiers to an IED. I'd held one as he died, promising to write his mother, promising he'd be remembered. I came home hollowed out, exhausted, grieving. My grandmother looked at me and said, "You look awful, dear. Is that store working you too hard? You should quit. No job is worth your health." I almost laughed, almost cried. Almost told her everything, the deployments, the losses, the unbearable weight of command. Instead, I said, "I'm okay, Grandma. Just a rough shift." She made me tea and told me about her friend's granddaughter who'd landed a nice, stable job as a dental hygienist. Regular hours, she emphasized. Home every night, I nodded and sipped. That's the thing about being underestimated, it becomes armor. As long as they thought I was struggling, they asked easy questions, safe ones. How work never led to conversations about combat. Still working nights, never touched on nightmares or explosions that weren't real. Keeping busy never opened the door to classified briefings or the burden of 3,000 lives. Their version of my life was simpler, safer for them and for me. So I maintained it carefully, deliberately, with the same precision I applied to military planning, until the day I couldn't anymore. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. My cousin Maura was expecting her second child, and the family was hosting a baby shower. "Please come," it said, written in my grandmother's neat cursive. "We'd love to see you." I nearly declined. A major training exercise was scheduled that weekend, the culmination of months of planning for one of my battalions. But my deputy was solid, the plan was complete. And after all these years, curiosity got the better of me. What would happen if I just showed up, let them pity me one last time, so I RSVP'd yes. The shower was at my grandmother's house, the same house where we'd gathered for decades. The same dining room where I'd eaten Christmas cookies 22 years ago and decided to become invisible. The same living room where I'd watched my cousin's achievements get celebrated while my own career was dismissed as odd jobs and night shifts. I arrived at 2 p.m. On Saturday, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a nice blouse. Not dressed up, but not dressed down either. The outfit of someone who worked nights and was tired, who didn't have the energy for anything fancy, who was just grateful to be included. The house was full of women, aunts, cousins, family, friends, Maura's colleagues from her marketing firm. The living room was decorated in pastels and balloons. A banner read, "Baby girl on the way," in glittering letters. "Sonia," my grandmother rushed over, pulling me into a hug. She was 78 now, her hair white, her movement slower, but her eyes still sharp with concern. "You made it. I wasn't sure you'd be able to get the time off." "I worked it out," I said, which was true. "Well, I'm glad you worked too hard, sweetheart." She looked me over with that familiar, worried expression. "Are you eating enough? You look thin." I was in the best shape of my life. I ran 5 miles every morning and maxed out my PT test. "I'm fine, Grandma." She didn't look convinced. "Well, come in. Let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour was a master class in endurance. I smiled, made small talk, admired the baby gifts, 8-finger sandwiches. I listened to Maura talk about her marketing campaigns and her daughter's piano lessons and her plans for the nursery. I congratulated her, genuinely happy for her success, and I felt the weight of their assumptions settle over me like a familiar coat. Sonia works nights. I heard my grandmother tell one of Maura's friends. Oh, how difficult, the woman said sympathetically. She's very dedicated, Aunt Helen added, never complains. What do you do? The woman asked me directly. I kept my answer vague. Logistics, personnel coordination, that sort of thing. She nodded, losing interest immediately. Logistics wasn't glamorous. Personnel coordination wasn't impressive. It was exactly the kind of answer someone in a dead-end job would give. Perfect. The gifts were opened. The cake was served. The conversations flowed around me, through me, past me. I was there but not there, present but invisible. Then my grandmother stood up, champagne flute in hand. I want to make a toast, she announced, her voice carrying across the room. Everyone quieted, turning to face her. Tamora and her growing family. We're so proud of you, dear. You've built such a beautiful life, a successful career, a wonderful husband, 2 lovely children. You're everything we hoped you'd become. Everyone raised their glasses, Tamora. My grandmother wasn't done. She looked around the room, her gaze landing on various family members. It's such a joy to see how well you've all done. Bria, a doctor, Tyler, a lawyer. Leanne, engaged to a wonderful man, you've all made us so proud. Her eyes found mine, something flickered in her expression. Concern, pity, that familiar worried love. My granddaughter can't sit at home at night, she said, her voice taking on that particular tone of defensive pride she used when talking about me. Probably stocking shelves at the dollar store when normal people are sleeping. The room went still. I felt every eye turned toward me, saw the expressions shift, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some simply curious. The aunts exchanged a solemn glance. I saw them. Saw the way Aunt Helen pressed her lips together. Saw the way Aunt Rebecca's shoulders shook slightly, both of them clearly holding back their laughter at the absurdity of it. Poor Sonia. Stocking shelves while everyone else was sleeping. How had she fallen so far? I should have been angry, should have been humiliated. Should have felt the sting of public mockery, even if it came wrapped in my grandmother's misguided love. Instead, I felt calm, detached, like I was watching a play and already knew how the final act would end. I raised my champagne flute. Tomorrow, I said clearly, and to family. Everyone drank, the moment passing, the conversation moving on, but the damage was done. I could feel it, the renewed pity, the sympathetic glances, the unspoken relief that they weren't me. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. I'd stay another hour, I decided, then make my excuses and leave. The game had been played, I'd gotten what I came for. Confirmation that after 22 years nothing had changed. At 4:45 p.m. there was a knock at the door. I'll get it. I heard my grandmother call from the kitchen. I was in the living room talking to one of Maura's friends about nothing important. I heard the door open, heard voices in the foyer. Heard my grandmother say something about the party being family only, then I heard a different voice. Male, apologetic, familiar. Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. I'm looking for Colonel Fakery. I was told she might be here. My blood turned to ice. No, 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 no. I stood up, moving toward the foyer, already knowing what I'd find, but hoping I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. Standing in my grandmother's doorway in his army dress uniform complete with chaplain's insignia and captain's bars was James Whitten, one of my brigade chaplain, a man I'd known for 4 years. A man who'd been with me in Syria, who'd helped counsel soldiers through trauma, who'd prayed with me after we lost those 2 soldiers to the IED. He was holding his cover in his hands, looking apologetic and uncomfortable in equal measure. Captain Whitten, I said, my voice coming out strained, what are you doing here? He turned, saw me, and his entire demeanor changed. He straightened, his face shifted from apologetic to professional. And then before I could stop him, before I could do anything, he brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. Colonel, he said, his voice clear and formal, glad to see you. I apologize for interrupting your family event, but there's an urgent matter at Fort Belvoir that requires your immediate attention. Captain Morrison tried to reach you by phone but couldn't get through. The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel every eye in that house on me. Could feel the weight of 22 years of fiction collapsing in real time. Slowly, I returned the salute. At ease, Captain, he dropped his hand. Ma'am, I have a vehicle standing by. We can leave immediately if. Give me a moment, Captain Whitten. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Calm, professional, nothing like the voice I'd been using for the past 2 hours. I'll meet you outside. Yes, ma'am. He saluted again, turned, and left. I stood in the foyer behind me in the living room, silence stretched like a physical thing, then I turned. My grandmother was frozen in the doorway to the kitchen, her hands still on the door frame, her champagne flute dangling from her fingers. Her face was white, completely, utterly white. In the living room, I could see the others. Aunt Helen's mouth was open. Aunt Rebecca had a hand pressed to her chest. Maura looked like she'd been slapped. Bria, Tyler, Leanne, all of them staring at me like I was a stranger who just wandered into their house wearing my face. Sonia, my grandmother's voice was small, confused. What? Who was that man? Why did he call you Colonel? I looked at her, at all of them. At 22 years of assumptions and pity and well-meaning condescension. Because that's my rank, Grandma, I said quietly. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I command a brigade at Fort Belvoir. That was one of my chaplain, and I need to go deal with an emergency. Aunt Helen's champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crystalline crack, breaking into 3 large pieces and a scatter of smaller ones. Pink champagne spread across the floor in a widening pool, soaking into the rug, but she didn't move. None of them moved, they just stared. My grandmother's hand finally loosened, her own glass tilting dangerously. Colonel, she whispered, but you work nights, you stock shelves, you said I work nights, I do. I run overnight training operations. I said I do inventory management, I do. I manage millions of dollars in military equipment. I said I deal with personnel issues, I do. I'm responsible for 3,000 soldiers. I picked up my purse from the side table. I never lied. Grandma, you just made assumptions. 22 years, Aunt Rebecca breathed. You've been for 22 years. Since I was 26, I had commissioned out of West Point, served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, made colonel 3 years ago. I looked at each of them in turn. I tried to tell you at the beginning. You didn't listen, so eventually I stopped trying. Maura found her voice. But why? Why would you let us think? Because it was easier, I said simply, for all of us. You got to feel superior. I got to keep my professional life separate from family drama. Everyone won. We didn't want to feel superior. My grandmother said, her voice breaking. We were trying to help. We thought you were struggling. We thought you thought what you wanted to think. I gentled my tone because despite everything, I loved her, loved all of them in my complicated way. You created a story that fit your worldview, and I let you. That's on both of us. I moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, I am proud of all of you. Bria, you're an excellent doctor. Tyler, you're doing important legal work. Leanne, I hope you're happy with your fiancé. Maura, congratulations on your daughter. You've all built good lives. My grandmother's face crumpled. Sonia, I have to go. There's an actual emergency. I opened the door, then paused. The baby shower was lovely. Thank you for inviting me. I walked out into the afternoon sunlight where Captain Witten was waiting by an army sedan, his face carefully neutral. I'm sorry, Colonel, he said as I approached. I had no idea. Your grandmother said you were just Sonia, and I didn't realize. It's fine, Captain. I slid into the passenger seat. What's the emergency? Supply convoy got hit with a flash flood in West Virginia. No casualties, but we've got equipment scattered across half a county and a battalion exercise that needs that gear by Monday morning. I buckled my seat belt. Get me to base. I'll coordinate recovery operations from the TOC. Yes, ma'am. As we pulled away, I looked back at my grandmother's house one last time. Through the window, I could see them still standing there, frozen in their broken tableau, trying to process the fact that the person they'd pied for 2 decades was someone they'd never known at all. I should have felt victorious, vindicated, satisfied that they finally knew the truth. Instead, I just felt tired and maybe a little sad. 22 years is a long time to play a role. Long enough that sometimes you forget where the performance ends and the truth begins. I'd let them underestimate me because it gave me power, gave me armor, gave me protection from questions I didn't want to answer. But maybe I'd also let them underestimate me because it was easier than being seen, easier than being vulnerable. Easier than admitting that underneath the rank and the ribbons and the command authority, I was still just Sonia there looking for her grandmother's approval. I never got the approval I wanted, but I got the approval I earned from my soldiers, my commanders, my peers, people who knew what I was capable of, who measured me by my actions rather than their assumptions. That should have been enough. Maybe now it would be. Colonel, Captain Witten's voice pulled me back to the present. Are you all right? I looked at him, at his concerned face, his chaplain's cross, his genuine worry for my well-being. One of my people, one of the 3,000 souls I was responsible for keeping safe, trained, and ready. I'm fine, Captain, I said. Let's go to work. He nodded, turning his attention back to the road. Through the window, Virginia countryside blurred past. Trees and fields and strip malls, the ordinary landscape of ordinary lives. Somewhere behind us, my family was trying to reconcile 22 years of assumptions with 5 minutes of truth. They'd probably call later, want to talk, want to understand. Maybe I'd answer. Maybe I'd explain. Maybe I'd let them into the parts of my life I'd kept hidden for so long. Or maybe I'd just keep driving forward toward the base, toward the work, toward the life I'd built while they thought I was stocking shelves. Either way, the game was over and I'd won.